My name is Heidi Hill, and I'm the Grants and Program Director at AWAIC, which is Abused Women's Aid in Crisis. And as far as how we're dealing with COVID-19, being an emergency domestic violence shelter, we are still an essential service, and we want to remain open and available for the people who need our services. But we are making quite a few adjustments to those services in order to remain for our participants to remain safe and healthy, and our staff to remain safe and healthy and able to work. So, for example, we aren't holding our supported education groups in person right now. We're doing those telephonically with case managers. We have staff who can work off-site doing that in order to sort of minimize the risk of exposure, having people in the building who don't necessarily need to be there if they're not providing direct services. We decided it would be better to have them off-site. And we are practicing a lot of social distancing in the shelter. So we're asking both our staff and our residents to really work hard on maintaining that 6-foot separation in order to stay healthy.
How is this pandemic affecting women seeking out AWAIC's resources?
It's early on, so it is hard to say. One thing that we have noticed, we've done some preliminary comparisons of call numbers and numbers of requests for shelter from this time last year, and then with this month, and our numbers are actually down, which initially was a surprise. We thought that the numbers would spike, but the more we've looked at it, we're realizing that that's because people probably are not able to reach out to access services in the way that they could before. If they are stuck in their house with their abuser 24 hours a day, finding a safe time and space to call the crisis line, for example, or come, to the front door and ask for help and talk to somebody is going to be much, much more difficult. It was already a difficult thing for people to do. Abusers are very controlling, and many will monitor the phone calls of their victims, the physical movements of their victims. And so getting away from that, especially in this situation, is very, very difficult. And I have no doubt that incidents of domestic violence are going up, but we may not know that full picture until some of the stay-at-home mandates are lifted.
What is AWAIC doing to accommodate those women who are stuck at home in quarantine with their abusers right now?
That's a good question. Right now, we have our crisis line, which is the best way for people who are not on site or not here in person to reach out to us. We don't have other technology at this time to be able to reach out to people. Some people do email. There is a contact form on our website that people can access, but it's not monitored 24 hours a day, so it's not a way to reach anybody in an emergency. So really the crisis line is the best way to reach staff. And like I said, it's that can be very difficult to access if somebody is watching everything that you do.
Mm-hmm. So we've been emailing back and forth, and in the course of those emails, you said there's usually a delay in numbers going up because people are just trying to stay safe and make it work at first. What might it look like for a woman in an abusive relationship to try to make it work during this quarantine?
There's probably going to be a lot of accommodating abusers' demands. We see this at other times, for example, holidays. Our numbers often go down around the holidays because people are, again, trying to make it work. And I think as time goes on, if abusers' demands become increasingly violent, difficult to follow, that's where we will probably be contacted and be more involved, or the police will. But I think when people are in these tough and really almost impossible situations, they're just doing everything they can to survive. They're doing a lot of placating, trying to keep up with abusers' changing demands in order to stay safe.
In those same emails, you mentioned that it might help to understand what an abusive relationship looks like when we're not in lockdown from a pandemic.
Right, right. I think it's important for people to remember what is involved in abuse, because I think a lot of people who maybe aren't in those situations will think of abuse as physical abuse. The black eye, the broken arm, that sort of thing, and not realize that there are a lot of things that often happen before a relationship gets to that point. There's a lot of, like I mentioned before, that controlling behavior, a lot of verbal abuse, psychological abuse, demands to know where someone's going, who they're spending time with, who they're calling, checking the odometer on the car, checking receipts from the grocery store, that kind of thing. That because it isn't physical, people don't always recognize it as abuse, but that controlling behavior is very, very dangerous, because it's when an abuser loses that power and control over their victim, that's where things escalate. And of course that looks different situation to situation, but for example, if a victim leaves a relationship, that will be a huge loss of power and control on the part of the abuser, and they may up their tactics and really strike out. It may have been very bad before, but now it may be worse. And so when family and friends, for example, are telling their loved one, you should just leave, you should get away, that's very, very well intentioned, but it can also be very dangerous, because when the abuser loses that power and control, like I said, they may up their abuse of that victim, and that's where things get even more dangerous.
When everyone at AWAIC is in a meeting, what kinds of things are you guys talking about right now? What are you worried about?
Right now, we're worried about people being able to access our services, and then once they do, we're worried about keeping them healthy. We serve a wide variety of people, all ages, all groups throughout the city, but we've noticed that a lot of the people that we serve have underlying health conditions and are otherwise vulnerable, and that isn't surprising in a traumatized population. Lifelong trauma can lead to a whole host of physical issues. And the way that this virus works is definitely people who have those underlying health issues are at higher risk. And so we are always thinking about how can we keep everybody safe, healthy, what to do if someone does get sick, what services to connect them to. And we're very, very lucky in Anchorage, because our city has got such good systems set up. They've been working very hard for months now on this issue, and so I feel very fortunate that we have that assistance from the city should anything happen to one of our participants. But that's basically our main topic of conversation. And then going forward, when can we get back to normal? What are we going to need to see in the city in order to know that it's safe to go back to normal? We want to open up, the services that we've had to alter. We'd love to get those back to normal as soon as possible, but we want to do that in a safe way. So those are our main conversations, in addition to the usual ones that we're having about how to keep people safe and resources that they may need in their particular case. Those are our usual ongoing conversations, but I think they've definitely taken a pandemic focus lately.
Mm-hmm. What does your schedule look like right now?
My schedule, my personal schedule?
Well, your daily schedule, your work schedule.
It's quite varied now. I think, we, not just me in particular, I think, but all of us, we spend so much time dealing with virus-related issues. It's kind of interesting to think of, well, what did we do before? Because we have all of this extra stuff to do now that we still fit into the day. But a lot of it is dealing with, virus-related stuff, pandemic-related stuff, trying to figure out where we can source cleaning materials, for example. We've always been very good at stocking cleaning materials and emergency supplies. It's always been a focus of ours. But, like everybody else in the city, it's getting increasingly difficult to find that sort of thing. So we spend a lot more time trying to identify sources for needed items than we would have had to before. Our schedules are a lot of dealing with what needs to happen right now, which they kind of always do. I think that's not unusual for any of us that work at AWAIC, but we find that now we're having to be even more flexible. Our schedules are changing every week to 2 weeks. We're just updating things as the situation warrants, and it's requiring a high degree of flexibility from all of us. But I think our team is fantastic. We've got a wonderful staff, and they just kept doing what they do best, which is taking care of our clients, and they've done a fantastic job. I'm really, really glad that we've got the team that we have.
I know it's only been a few weeks. It feels like more that we've been.
It does.
But do you have any stories from this time that, you're really proud that AWAIC came through or, went over and above?
Oh boy. I think, gosh, probably every story. They're still, like I said before, they're still doing the work that they've always done, our staff members, and they're still getting people housed. A lot of the clients we work with have some difficult backgrounds sometimes, and our case managers work tirelessly to identify good, safe landlords for them to be connected to get them housed safely, and they've continued to do that through all of this. With all of the challenges that are going on, they're still doing that. They're still getting people safe. I don't know if any one story stands out that I would be able to share, just being a small town, but just that sort of ongoing daily work that they have not changed. And if anything, that they've upped it, because they know people need to, the sooner we can get people safe and then housed, the sooner the better.
Yeah, the sooner we can get back to normal, the better.
Yeah, yes, definitely.
So in our emails, you also said that anecdotally, the advocates say it seems like you're getting more first-time calls from people in situations exacerbated by having to remain at home. Could you give me any examples of what these first-time callers are saying? And you can be completely general about it.
Okay. Yeah, and I checked in again today just to see if that pattern has remained the same, and they said, yeah. They said that it's very noticeable that there are more first-time callers, people who are citing the pandemic as a contributing factor to what's going on in their situations. And I mean, I know that the choice to abuse is a choice, and it's on the part of the abuser. And there's a lot of people who are stressed out right now based, they've lost jobs, they've got other things going on, maybe they've got relatives that are sick, but they're not abusive. And so an abuser will use basically any excuse that they find available to explain their behavior. However, a lot of the callers that, we are talking to lately have said that, this is the first time I'm calling. This is the first time that we've been home together like this for weeks at a time. And, he's lost his job. He spent what money we did have on some, not food, other things. He's not taking care of us now, and if I ask about it, he hits me, that kind of thing. So whereas there may not have been those contributing factors before, now they're present in people's lives. And it's another layer of pressure and another layer of stress. And with people losing their jobs, that also contributes to victims maybe not having the financial resources to be able to leave. If they were working and supporting themselves before and maybe could get a plane ticket or get a hotel room or something, they now maybe can't do that because they don't have a job. And so it really limits victims' options, as well as contributes to the overall stress of the situation.
Have you ever dealt with something like this before, where in addition to being abused, there was forced isolation?
No, not something like this that's been community-wide. I mean, isolation is something that abusers often force on their victims for a variety of reasons, but that's, on an individual situation basis. If you isolate somebody either physically or emotionally from seeing friends, family, any sort of support systems, you can very effectively control them if they've got no one to reach out to. But that's, again, on an individual basis. I personally have not seen this kind of, community-wide isolation, before. So it's not something that I've been at AWAIC for 15 years, and I don't think it's something that we have dealt with before. I mean, we've dealt with, the earthquake and, the natural disasters that are in comparison short-lived, but nothing like this before.
We were talking about the forced isolation in addition to the abuse, the community isolation. What does a best case scenario look like in your mind?
Best case scenario for what? What specifically?
The woman being abused in this situation right now.
I think the best case scenario is the woman or whoever the victim is being able to reach out for resources, and whether that's calling us, being able to call the police, getting help somehow. That's the best case scenario right now, because I think that access is limited, and I can't comment on the police department, of course, not working there, but I've heard anecdotally that calls of this type are down with them as well, and again, I don't have numbers or anything like that, but I wonder when this is all over how much they're going to spike. But I think if, with so many people being home, if neighbors can keep an eye on their neighbors and check in, however it's safe to do so, if they hear something, say something, get that help. Maybe the victim can't call the police, but if a neighbor hears something, they can call the police. And I think, knowing who our neighbors are and knowing what to look out for, I think that's probably the best way that people can be kept as safe as possible given the circumstances.
Mm-hmm. What does a worst case scenario look like through isolation and abuse?
Unfortunately, the worst case scenario is homicide. And that is not something that is really that unusual in Anchorage. I don't have numbers off the top of my head, but every year we see domestic violence homicide. And that is definitely the worst case scenario. And that is why we have the emergency shelter and the services that we do to hopefully be able to help people before things reach that point. Mm-hmm.
So what would you suggest women in abusive isolation situations do right now?
It's going to depend on their individual situation and whether they are able to reach out. For example, if their abuser monitors their phone, that's going to be difficult. They'll need to know how to, if they make a call, they'll need to know how to erase that data. But calling our crisis line at 272-0100 is a great way to get started on getting out and getting out safely. We help people safety plan all of the time, and that looks different for each person. But I think if they are able to reach out, maybe they're an essential worker and they are still leaving the house and they're not around their abuser all the time, or maybe they are doing that week's grocery run, something like that. There may be an opportunity to get help during that time. If they're able to make that phone call to us, we can help them safety plan with those scenarios and make some suggestions on what to have prepared, what to bring with them. If nothing else, they can come to the front door and push the buzzer. We are here all the time, 24 hours a day. There's always somebody here. Someone can run to the front door and we will get them in the building and get them safe and figure out how best to help them.
Well, thank you so much, Heidi, for talking to me. Is there something maybe that I overlooked or something that you wanted to add?
No, I don't think. I think that's a pretty good coverage of the issue, and I wish I had more data on it, but I really appreciate you covering it, because I think in normal times it's such a huge issue, and people may have heard of the studies that the university has done of this affecting about half of the women in town, and those studies didn't look at how it affects men, but they're affected in large numbers as well. And so there's a lot of people who were already dealing with this, and I think that now that our community is dealing with another really big issue, I think the combination is just it's it can be fairly dangerous. And I'm glad that you're covering it and getting the word out to more people about how to access services. So I appreciate that.
For more information about how you can support local grassroots journalism, go to www.patreon.com/Crude Magazine. Thank you to Trina Duber, Seward Brewing Company, The Grind Coffee Shop in Juneau, Derek Adolph, Blue and Gold Board Shop, Sharon Liska, Alaska Surf Adventure, and Aquila Space for their support at the company man level. This conversation was written, hosted, and produced by me, Cody Liska, for Crude Magazine. Music was produced by Alcoda Beats.